and it needs to be kept free from conflicts, of course. And we also, in our strategy, made a clear reference to Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals when looking at space. Because, as we state in the text, it says that investment in space is ultimately investment in our own planet, meaning that just like our own planet Earth, a very current topic these days, space needs to be handled with care. And if you do that, you need to have responsible behavior. You need to have mutual respect. You need transparency and trust, within the global and multilateral environment. So therefore, we also see these conversations that we're having today and in other places are really, really important, and we need to have more of it, definitely not less. I also want to say before, so this is what I'm going to say on space, and I wanted to mention it because I actually believe it connects to what you just mentioned, the importance of transparency and confidence-building measures when we meet and speak, the TCBMs. And I think that you can work in many, many ways. And for us, having this strategy and be open and transparent is one way of telling what is, how do we look up on space, what do we do, and how do we refer to space. I also want to say that, unlike most of you in the room, I'm definitely not a space expert. That is not my field of expertise, but I'm a diplomat, and that also connects with now when I'm going to speak about the Hague Code of Conduct, that it's from a diplomatic angle and as the present rotating chair. But coming back to the need for transparency and transparency that builds confidence. So now I will turn into an instrument that I, for almost a year now, Sweden now has been chairing. Monday next week we will have our annual regular meeting in Vienna, and we will hand over the chairmanship to Norway, who is next in turn. So what is then the Hague Code of Conduct against proliferation of ballistic missiles, and what is the state of play in this field, and how do we foster transparency and trust? As we know, during the recent years, proliferation of ballistic missiles, particularly those capable of delivering weapons of mass destruction, has given rise to serious concern by the international community. Developments, testing, and use of the missiles is clearly a destabilizing factor in our world. It feeds mistrust, suspicion, and uncertainty around the globe. And these sentiments, as I said, in turn, could also lead states to taking, countermeasures which might further destabilize. And with the spread of technology as well as its advancement, the trend we are currently experiencing of more and more states regaining launch capability is likely to continue. And there is probably a growing number also of other actors, as was also discussed yesterday. So we think, and we see also in the discussions we have had as chairs over the year, that there is a growing interest for the Hague Code, the HCOC as such. It's something that we more and more speak about. And I also want to say that this is, of course, one limited piece of instrument. It's not the universal solution to increasingly complex changes and proliferation. It is first and foremost a political commitment, a confidence building measure. But we believe that it contributes to filling an important gap in the context of international rules-based order. It promotes an international norm against the proliferation of ballistic missiles, and it has established a framework for voluntary measures, for reporting, and that provides transparency, as I said. The Hague Code of Conduct was adopted in 2002, as you just said, and it's the only multilateral instrument which deals with ballistic missiles. The number of subscribing states have grown over the years from 93 to 140. We had a new subscribing state just a few weeks ago. It has different coverage. It's well covered in certain regions. It's less in others. And we have both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states as subscribing to the code. And the code itself, some of you might have seen the document. It really consists of a set of general principles, modest commitments, and limited confidence-building measures. The main objectives of the code are ballistic non-proliferation. Subscribing states acknowledge the need to prevent and curb proliferation of ballistic missile systems capable of delivering weapons of mass destruction. Arms control. The code highlights the importance of strengthening and gaining wider adherence to multilateral disarmament and non-proliferation mechanisms. Confidence. The code stresses adherence to and full compliance with international arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation norms. Peaceful purposes. The code specifies that states should not be excluded from using the benefits of space for peaceful purposes, but they must not contribute to the proliferation of ballistic missiles capable of delivering weapons of mass destruction. And that's something also in this context that I want to emphasize, that it's really, you have the right, if you're a subscribing state, to the use of peaceful purposes in space, and it should not be excluded, and it doesn't really impede any developments of national space program or ballistic missiles program, but it's about curbing and being careful. And in practical terms then, what does a subscribing state agree to provide? You agree to provide to make pre-launch notifications on ballistic missiles and space launch vehicles, launches and test flights. You subscribe to submit an annual declaration of policies on ballistic missiles and space launch vehicles during the preceding year, the year before. Texts to ratify, exceed, or otherwise to abide to within the code are the Outer Space Treaty from 67, Liability Convention from 72, and the Registration Convention from 75. The long names are, of course, in the document. So the code itself is quite a low threshold. It's open for everyone, and it's quite easy to access. And it offers a mechanism where it's free of charge, and it's not for most states a heavy administrative burden. But it is a platform for exchange, for being part of this group of states, and it cuts across regional borders, and you receive this information on pre-launch notifications and the reporting. So you are part of that larger community. So it offers it's both a political commitment, but it has also this very practical side on being, part of the exchange, and also having a platform for discussion as we meet at least twice a year. And you work through, also there is a website which is both open and for subscribing states, and Austria is providing since the very beginning and continues to do so very generously with secretariat that the ICC that is providing the support during the course of the years to the subscribing states. So maybe I stop there in order to also open up for discussions. But this is in very general terms a description of the Hague Code of Conduct, what it entails, and how one could, see this as an instrument for openness, confidence, and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this presentation, very complete presentation of this tool, this unique tool. Of course, such a tool is facing with many challenges, and I said in my introduction that adaptation should be the key for such an instrument to be kept alive. And in particular, what we see in the development of space techniques, in the proliferation of technological know-how, also in the strategic decisions made by states, but also by private actors about new forms of launchers, for example, can be must be taken as factors of change, and must have some effects on how collectively we can address this. And we will have now Dr. Isabelle Sourbès from Research National Center from France, and a specialist in space policy analysis, telling us some elements about trends in the field of light space launch. And we'll see that this is one of the key issues for the HCOG community to address, which is the proximity, technological proximity between these kind of technologies and possible proliferated ballistic missile technologies. Even if, of course, these are not the two similar technologies. And again, and I will reiterate what Ambassador Nielsen just said, this is a transparency building tool. It's not a control regime. And this is very important. Obviously, the Hague Code of Conduct does not preclude and even encourage any country to develop its own space technology and policy. So I will now give the floor to Isabelle, who will give us some elements. I think it's more for food for thought, I would say, and for feeding future questions from the audience, possibly, and we'll have some possibility. Okay.
Thank you.
Isabelle.
I have a small presentation. Maybe you can launch it. Okay, so I'm very glad to be here. I'm Isabelle Sourbès-Verger. I'm a researcher and I'm a geographer. And I'm working about space occupation and space policies. And so I want to show you, yes. And, well, exactly. So I want maybe to draw your attention to a broader view about what is happening in space occupation today, and especially this new thing, which is the launching of more and more new small satellites with small launchers. And this is very interesting because it means that it's on a natural way in the field of space occupation that we will have new issues, raising issues like small launchers and the private companies operating these small launchers in the near future. And of course, a lot of countries are interested in developing small satellites and also small launchers because it's a quite easier technology, it's less expensive, and it's a possibility for them to have an independent presence in space. So I think it's very, very important for you to have this larger view, this broader view about what's happening in space. So if I, next slide, okay. Just to show you that in this diagram you can see that there is a growing trend and a growing number of small satellites. If you look at that picture, we can see that there is a different weight of the satellites, and they are put 5 years by 5 years in order to give you a view since the beginning of space occupation. And the colors are quite simple. It's blue for the USA, red for the USSR, and now Russia. It's green for Europe, it's yellow for China, and the other is in gray. And what I want to show you, especially on that picture, on that slide, is that the idea to have the small satellites, I mean the upper part of the diagram, it's mainly something which is first American and then, how can I say, European trend. And this is interesting because more and more new small satellites are coming. You have the issue of which kind of launcher will be the more interesting to launch these small satellites. And so if we come back to the next picture, this is the trend of the last eight years in terms of number of small satellites. And what you can see is a huge number of American satellites. And it shows you that it's a kind of, how can I say, a US ecosystem influencing all the other part of the world in terms of new technologies. Of course, we are very often speaking about new space. New space is this idea of private actors coming with new ideas, coming from a different world. It means information technology more than aeronautic or defense. But these kind of new actors, in fact, are only a small piece of interest for us. The issue of these new actors is the private quality of these actors. It means that now you may have more and more private actors intervening in the field of launching. And this is a new issue because it means that the states have to control the different way to occupy space, and not only to use governmental systems, but also to deal with private and to deal with economic issues. So if we go to just to give you a broad overview of the situation, and now I just want to show you what are the launch opportunities for these small satellites. And what you can see is a huge role played by the Indian PSLV, which is a medium-class launchers. You can see it in pink, and this launcher looks like a very good system to put small satellites and very small satellites in orbit. And this is interesting because if you look at the business case of new launchers, new small launchers, it's not so obvious that you have in a very good situation. And well, what I want to say is that the link between small satellites and small launchers is not obvious at all in terms of business. Maybe the best way and the less expensive way to launch small satellites is to use a medium-class launchers. And in this case, it means that there is no real risk of proliferation of very small launchers. But this is something that we need to have to confirm in the next years. Next one. And here it is, the Small Launchers Program all over the world, and I think it's give you a good idea about what you have to think now about the future situation. And I mean that Torenbar feels quite concerned by this kind of diagram. Of course, it does not mean that all these launchers will go to the end and will be able to launch satellites. But it means that you have plenty of new countries interested to develop space activities and to go further in terms of independence and in terms of how can I say it, responsibility in space. And this is very interesting if you look, for instance, at the United Kingdom to see how many projects they have to have very small launchers. But this is one point. The second point is that small launchers means that you are trying to do these launches with a different technological origin. It may be new launchers. For instance, in India, they are developing a new small satellite launchers, especially designed for small satellites in order to capitalize on the PSLV capability and to do something really dedicated to small satellites. But you may also have the conversion of missile, which is the older trend for the first light launches, and especially coming from Soviet Union, but also on the US side. And then you have a new trend, which is interesting too, especially for you, which is the upgrading of sounding rockets, which means that sounding rockets may be something in the field of the Ashrock 2, at least to some extent, or what we need to think, what we need is to think about it. The other important issue is that there is no how can I say, there is no actually rules of road, even in the occupation of space, and not only on the launching of satellites. And with the growing number of small satellites, you have these old issues like occupation of space, crowding space, the problem of debris, the problem of the control of the space occupation. And this is part of the coming back to the problem of the control of the launching. Something I want to stress too is that, of course, all these small launchers will appear or not according to the private business that they may hope to have and to realize. I don't know if there is a true opportunity and a real market for all these launchers, but it's also interesting to think that maybe behind the picture of a small launcher, you can think to develop small new technologies, and with this technology to do a kind of reverse technology to come back to missile technology. So this is, we have seen it with North Korea, for instance, doing space launchers, and this space launcher is considered as a way to test missile, in fact, intercontinental missile. But we can also think about it in terms of reverse engineering coming from light launchers to missile. I don't know if it's the best way to do, because we know that missile and launchers have different technologies and have different purposes, but I think it's something that we have to keep in mind. So maybe I will stop. I don't know if there is one more or not. I don't remember if there is one more picture or not in the... Oh yes, there is probably two, and I don't know. Maybe we will come back. We will come back later on it. It's just a presentation of the number of small satellites by countries, and this is interesting because it will show you that there is no link between the number of small satellites belonging only by a country and, next slide, the number. Exactly, and here you have the number of small satellites launched by a state. So if we come back to the United States case, for instance, you can see that there is a huge small satellites developed by United States. I mean, private and public and everybody, but there is no strict link to the number of launching and the capability exactly, and the capability, national capability. To launch this satellite. So it's just to give you a broad idea of what is happening in space, what is happening in terms of new trends, and that you, in order that you keep in mind this kind of issues that are forthcoming issue, and which can give us more and more interest to have something to deliver and to think about the links between launchers and light launchers and missiles. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle. I think all this is coming, I think, from a database that's been developed over the last 2 years, and of course, it's only a very quick overview of what's been done, and I think you might answer some questions about the evolution of all these sectors, and would be interesting. And you mentioned the fact that, of course, and in our context today, having this link, possible link between the development of small space launch capabilities and possibly derived missile capabilities as an issue, as a possible issue. And this is precisely, I think, what our next presenter is going to address partly, and there's going to be some other issues, I think, with Mr. Talinbas from the Fisher Institute. So, Tal, you have the floor.
Bonjour, je vous remercie pour l'invitation. Je continuerai en anglais. I would like to thank UNIDIR and all its partners for organizing this event. Just a quick remark before I'll start my initial thoughts on the subject. Last year I spoke about the commonality between small satellite launch vehicles and ballistic missiles, and specifically with regard to DPRK and some of the Iranian launchers, which derived directly from ballistic missiles. But I want to emphasize that satellite launch vehicle is not equal to ballistic missiles, but they, of course, share a lot of technologies, especially in propulsion and some engineering aspects as the materials used, guidance and control systems, and so on. I have some small list of trends that I think in part emerged from yesterday's discussions and directly related to the recent presentation. The large number of players in the field of small satellite launch vehicles could lead to several trends in my thinking. First, leak of and uncontrolled distribution of technical knowledge. If we are speaking about 100 or even more small enterprise emerging as providers of satellite launch vehicles for small satellites, at the end, of course, not all the companies will succeed, and we will going to see a lot of people with technical knowledge that are looking for a job. Some will eventually be included in other successful, more successful companies, but we all remember, this is a different situation, but we all remember the design group from Makeyev of Ukraine to the DPRK. So we might see something like this in the future. And unreliable, this is another thing which is more technical. Unreliable satellite launch vehicle could harm existing assets in space. And it is goes without saying that some of the newcomers, some of the new launch vehicles will fail. Some will fail on the launch pad, some will fail on the way, but some could fail in low Earth orbit. So this is another situation that we have to keep in mind, including the space situational awareness, which is going to be even more challenging in the future. Common knowledge of launch vehicles. I'm aware of many projects related to nanosatellites, and there is a trend in the world of sharing ideas and information, and some initiatives of open source satellites. So we might see in the future, not so far future, an open source satellite launch vehicle. It could be something of great value for space education and technical education, but could turn out as something that we might think could be of danger. I don't want to talk a lot about all the regimes and regulations and code of conducts, but we can see, contrary to the Hague Code of Conduct, other regimes like MTCR, Wassenaar, and so on, we can see an ongoing decline in the effectiveness of those types of control regimes and so on. And I don't know what will be the situation in regard to new companies involved in satellite launch vehicles. And we have to keep in mind that those are not countries, those are not nations that signed the treaties and so on. So I think one solution could be a national legislation of space laws and even more export control on some technologies. And I spoke to Xavier yesterday about the trend of using, for example, 3D printing of rocket engines parts. And in the future, I am positive that we will see that not on the darknet, but on the websites of several companies, people could just download some files and embark on their own, let's say, backyard rocketry project. So this should be addressed at a national level I don't see how international organizations and treaties and control regimes could deal with the cascade effect of hundreds of satellite launch vehicles enterprise around the world. So I believe also that there is a need of fundamental research to lay the foundation for identification of the problem and addressing it, to make some discussion that could be fruitful on the field of satellite launch vehicles, small satellite launch vehicles. Perhaps HCOC could be the platform to do it because of the similarities between the ballistic missiles and the success, relative success of the number of countries that already signed this initiative. So I believe that this is, actually I believe that the time for discussion on the trends of future satellite launch vehicles as a threat to satellites, to spread of rocket technology around the world, it was supposed to be several years ago. But starting now, 2019, it is also good to address the problem, first at a level of awareness of the general, of this public and the general public as well, decision makers, legislation at a national level, and of course the ever-growing importance of international organizations, treaties, and regimes. So this is for now.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this very, very good overview of the difficulties we might be faced with. You mentioned the fact that I was interested by the fact that you see an ongoing decline of some existing tools. I noted that these are control regime tools mostly, and it's interesting that certainly we can assess this. It's interesting to see that in the case of the HCOC, which is not a control regime, by the way, but a transparency-making instrument, we don't see indeed this kind of difficulty. And precisely, I would like, in the first round of questions I might ask before the audience, I would like to come back a bit to the first presentation and to Ambassador Nissen. Come back to the HCOC as a case study for our conference, I would say, and as a possible tool, which doesn't have to be confused, by the way, with what should be something for space. But Ambassador Nissen, what could you see as being the main benefits for states which have subscribed to the HCOC? You know, often we have the question of, you have 140 signatory countries, most of them don't have neither missile nor space launch. Space launchers. And so it's interesting to see this dynamic, and how do you assess this?
Thank you. As I said earlier, I think as far as what we have, you know, we are a subscribing state, of course, but what we see, what I see as the main advantages is that you are part of a platform, a quite large platform, 140 subscribing states, where these relevant issues can be exchanged and they can be debated, and you are part of receiving information on pre-launch notifications and via the annual reports. You're part of that network, and the states meet at least twice a year, and you can develop also in that regard a professional network. And then, as I said, you also have during the course of the year through the secretariat provided by the Austrian government, you also have a reference point for contact and exchange if need be. And in very practical terms, this is, of course, it helps avoid misunderstandings among neighbor states and other states over intentions when it comes to pre-launch notifications, including of satellite launches. And I think, as I said, one strength is the large number of subscribers. And but we also, of course, need to emphasize among the subscribers, the code becomes as good as, as you implement it, as you provide your these pre-launch notifications in time, and as you provide these annual reports. So this is also another part of it, and that that goes back to all of us who are part of the HCOC. And then finally, aside of that, of course, it do in these times provide a strong political signal of commitment and leverage for you as a state that you are part of this and you are part of strengthening international cooperation, exchange, and in the end, peace and security. And so these I would say as being the main practical and political parts.
Okay, but then following up your development, would you say that you would see the HCOC as a possible, as possibly being translated some sort of new instrument for space? How much would you see the relationship? And do you?
I think that's, as I said, yeah, that's on. As I said, I'm not a space expert. I have not been part of these discussions that I understand have been going on for a long time. So I would refrain from saying that. But what I think is good with the HCOC and what we see is it's easy, accessible, and it's open to all, and it's a way to move forward. So in that sense, and there is a text that is quite clear. There, not everything is clearly defined, but that is also something that you'll have to weigh against each other on, accessibility and being, very, very rigid in it is. But yeah, I think I won't say so much about that. What I want to say, though, is when it comes to this as a, political commitment, a legally binding instrument at core, that it was developed outside, the multilateral fora, but we have also over the years then worked, and there is a biannual resolution in the first committee and in the General Assembly, and I think we should also recognize that this resolution and this support has gained more and more traction. Last time around, when we in December 2018, we had actually 171 states voting in favor of the resolution, 12 abstained, and only one voted no. I think that is also something to consider, that you might start somewhere and move further.
But then my next question would be, what do you do to promote the HCOC? Being such an attractive tool, what?
I think we have, as chair and together with the FRS, we have done a number of regional seminars. This has been going on for a long time. Most recently, we've been in South Asia and West Africa, and we've been in the Caribbean region, inviting both subscribing states and non-subscribing states to discussions, and I think that is in itself a quite interesting concept, where you can also provide a fora for states to discuss these matters more broadly. So that's something that we have done, and as I said earlier on, I think the implementation is also important. For us as already subscribing states, an instrument is just as good as we make it. So these are maybe the two things that I want to emphasize: universalization and implementation, and also being open for having a fora where you can discuss depending on what states are interested in. You can discuss, how what subjects connected you can discuss.
Thank you for this, and of course, we can answer other questions about this. This particular tool that could be seen as a way forward, as an example, possibly for our space security issues here. Tara, I just wanted to come back on something you said. You said that. Of course, a ballistic missile is not a space launcher, and they have the same purpose first, and then it doesn't use exactly the same techniques. And at the same time, you said that there was some sort of proximity that you feel will, and you fear that it will become more and more the case because of the new way of building things. You mentioned the 3D printing and these kind of things. So, would you say that the current instrument for controlling proliferation, for controlling illicit technology, should evolve, and how it could evolve? Could you elaborate on this a bit?
Yeah, I think that it should be evolved, but we already know and seen many times illegal traffic of components for ballistic missiles. Not for private use, of course, but by countries, be it carbon fibers or tungsten pieces for jet vanes of the engine, and some electronics for guidance and control. So already we know that if you want to embark on a ballistic missile program, you could succeed even though the materials are monitored and there is a control over materials and technologies. So I'm not so optimistic about this issue, but I want to point out one thing, that a small launch vehicle could, in theory, be evolved into a ballistic missile. By the way, this is not the best path to embark, but on the positive side, the range will be very limited relatively to other missiles, and so is the payload capability. And there is a technology needed for ballistic missiles, especially for weapons of mass destruction, regarding the re-entry vehicle, the thermal protection, and so on, which is not so easy to do. And those very small launchers are not the best tool to deal with it. So short-range ballistic missiles could be an issue, but not ICBMs, of course, and not capable and suitable for a large warhead. So this is something on the positive side. On the negative side is that you cannot impose unlimited limitations on the current technologies, because it became more and more available, cheaper, easy to use. You mentioned the use of 3D printings, but also if we are talking about materials to build the launcher themselves, let's say that we are going to build a launcher out of carbon fibers, but you could use the same materials for bikes and golf clubs. Okay, so you cannot impose unlimited control on the materials. The remaining issue for the moment is the knowledge, is the technical know-how. That could be addressed.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that what we noticed in the discussions in the NCOC environment is that regarding this link between the space launch and the missile technologies, the discrimination between the development of space launchers and the development of missile is getting more and more difficult, more and more thin, because 20 years ago, developing a launcher was meaning that you were having as an objective to put up a satellite of a few tons or of a few hundreds of kilos. So it means that you needed some technical elements that were really typical of a launcher development. With the advent of a bigger number of small space launchers, because today you just need to put up maybe CubeSats or several kilos satellite, creates an opportunity for any state to develop a very small space launch technology in terms of size, for example, which makes it much more similar to typical missile development. So I mean, from the simple perspective of getting an information about what's done, it's more and more difficult. This is why, and it's been reflected in a number of meetings we have had, the notion of transparency and goodwill in producing documents and saying that this is meant for this kind of use or this kind of use is key. And of course, such a transparency building tool relies very much on cooperation of the signatory countries. And this is an interesting process because it creates some sort of a community where the country have to play the rules, in a sense. It's very easy at some point to maybe not to be exactly exhaustive in the documentation of this. And I think it's the notion of interdependency, and it's a bit like this for space, by the way. We're all interdependent in space. This notion of interdependency and the notion of when you're faced with interdependent difficulties, you need to find collective solutions and political solutions is very key in this age code process. It doesn't mean, of course, and this is sometimes the reactions we have from some states, but how can you verify things? It's not a treaty. There's no verification. It's really a positive approach by the signatory states to abide by the rule and play the game. And this is an interesting, and of course, that's a bet. We're betting on the goodwill. So I think it's an interesting state of mind. And the fact that we have seen recently countries convinced, in a sense, by this kind of positive approach is somewhat encouraging, even if it might be, of course, a very soft instrument in terms of controlling, actually, what's going on. So I will now turn to the room. So, Jai, you will have the first turn. So thank you for raising your tag like this, if you want, or raise your hand. Please, Jai.
Yes, good morning. Morba Jai, University of Texas at Austin. I was trying to really follow the thread of the panel with a little bit of difficulty, but I guess there's a couple of things that I want to say. One, in terms of looking at the data that you showed, Isabel, about small launchers and small satellites and how it doesn't necessarily match, I think in some part that makes sense because what that's saying is that you have a lot of people in the U.S. launching small satellites, and the best business to launch isn't necessarily American-based launch companies. So to me, that's not there's no aha moment necessarily coming from that. In terms of technologies and looking at this dual use, to me, small launchers are becoming the Uber of global access to space. And I don't know how many people in the room think that Uber is always the best idea. I don't always think it's the best idea. And so certainly there's got to be some way to monitor and trend the activities of these small launchers and make that evidence globally accessible. And some technologies can't be used for missile defense, just like some people pointed out. So it would be good to have a globally accessible database of these small launchers as they develop that include some of these technologies that they have, and be able to trend their performance in terms of the types of systems that they're launching, how well they're able to deploy things on orbit. Like, these are things that we need in order to be able to establish accountability for these people. So any comments that people would have on the panel regarding that would be well received.
Thank you, Moriba. Isabel, you want to comment?
Regarding the idea to have a database about small launchers, we are doing such a work in French now, and we are trying to look at a different kind of propulsion, for instance, of these different launchers, and also the discretion of this launcher, because some of them are able to be launched with a very quick delay and very shortly, and this raises a very, very sensitive issue of the space situational awareness also, because it's really part of the problem. And when we look at which countries are able to have a SSA, you see that there is only the United States on the full system, and to some extent Russia, and maybe in few time China and India and Europe later. So I think this is this issue of which kind of launchers, which, for instance, when you have a land launch system, but you have also mobile system coming from these new launchers, which is a strategic issue and a very, very difficult and tricky one. And this is the same kind of system of the mobile missile. You put it on a truck and then you go everywhere around 60 kilometers or something like that. You also have sea launch system and air launch system. So we are trying to do this kind of accountability, but the problem is that it's not so sure to be able to see what will happen, because you have a lot of projects, you have plenty of projects, but you don't have business case behind. And this kind of private project needs some money, so they need to have some customers. And the link between the small launchers and the small satellite, you think about UNIDIR, well, it's right, but if you want to launch small satellites, it's better to ask like on the free-floating launchers or everything. And for instance, the Indian case is very, very interesting, because the PSLV has not been done for that, and it's the best launcher today to launch this satellite. So we will see about the new small satellite launchers, SSLV, which is supposed to be ready at the end of the year, if it's a good way to deal with it. But the idea to control and at least to have information about what is, I think it's a tricky question, but I think it's really useful to have a look on it, for sure.
I think, Isabel, yes, Daniel. I just have just a question of precision. You have counted something like 200 projects?
Yeah.
So
if we are looking at all kinds of projects, I mean even paper project, just a page on the internet to say we are doing a small and fantastic launchers, ready, not expensive, wonderful thing. You have around 200 projects. But some of them, it's funny because some of them you may find them twice with different names, for instance. Different names, different companies, but the concept is still the same. So it's really, for instance, something like it's virtual, in fact. And if we rely on what is more relevant, I said we at least have 50 cases, which is a lot.
And also you mentioned this particular issue of the mobile space launchers project. There's not a lot, but it's becoming to...
It's becoming more and more...
to be, yes, and it's interesting because in our perspective, this mobility makes it even more blurring at some point.
Yeah.
And this is something that is legitimate in a space launch, by the way. It's just a matter, as I said in my introduction, adaptation is key. And this is something that doesn't have as an objective to curb and prevent from doing things, but it has to adapt to it to be more efficient and relevant, I would say, and as a multilateral. So again, the goodwill here is key. Daniel, you had a question. Two questions. Oh, yeah.
Thanks. I'm not Daniel Porras. I'm sitting next to him. I'm John Borry from UNIDIR. First of all, thank you to the panelists. I think this has been really interesting, and I'm glad to see that there's some sort of discussion about missile and rocket challenges, because I think that, you know, they need to be seen as a whole with space security issues. I have a question, and that's really, what about so-called hypersonic weapons, which haven't really been talked about by this panel. I mean, 3 countries already have different forms of hypersonic glide vehicles: China, Russia, and the US. And France has now announced plans to flight test an HGV by 2021. And a number of other countries are working on, either alone or in collaboration, on so-called technological demonstrators. So ostensibly these are for civil purposes, but the nature of this work is frequently dual use, and it's highly conceivable that more states in the future are going to develop HGVs. So it would also seem that these missiles or missile booster launch glider systems have got implications for space security. They're maneuverable, they're unpredictable in their flight path, and this could easily increase misperception in high-tension situations. And of course, tracking them may well require space-based systems. And the idea has even been raised one day of mounting interceptors in orbit to sort of try to shoot them down. And of course, these space-based systems are part of broader military space situational awareness and military command and control systems to detect and track objects, so they themselves could become targets in a conflict. So there are all sorts of interesting kind of potentialities here. But it seems to me that at the moment, existing mechanisms like the HCOC and the Missile Technology Control Regime aren't really well adapted to dealing with the challenges that HGVs could pose, even if the political will existed. So my question is, how do you think the international community should approach this? I mean, for example, Anne-Sophie, is it something being discussed in the HCOC context? Should it be? Is this something to be concerned about? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Sophie, you want to?
Thank you for a difficult question. I think this is definitely something we should be concerned about. This is something where we should, I think we all, I think very much of the discussion on many related issues today is that we see things happening. We see there is a reality, but our forests are sometimes not, you know, fully adaptable to discuss it. So I think definitely we need to continue to discuss these things. We have so far not done it within the HCOC. That is, of course, also a matter within the among subscribing states. How do we want to develop it, and you know, for what purposes, and what are the pros and what are the cons in that regard. So these are so the quick question to that is no, and I think you probably need to have discussed this in different forums, because it you know, it hits a wide range of very difficult questions.
Yeah, I don't have the M&M from yesterday, but I think that you deserve to get it. 2 points. One is the mobile platforms, be it sea launch, air launch, and ground-based launchers. MTCR is already covering this issue. Even to get a permission from one country to launch a satellite launch vehicle from another country, it is a huge challenge. It is possible to do, but it is very, very hard. The challenge is the notification of the launches. And by the way, we are going to see a new sea launch platform as early as next week from China. So in terms of the controlling the transfer of the vehicles, I believe that the problem is not so big at the moment because of the current mechanism. Regarding hypersonic weapons, this is a very, very interesting issue. We have 2 families, the boost glide and the scramjets. In part, both technologies are using ballistic missiles as the first stage, sometimes even for the second stage. And I'm positive that this would be an ever-growing threat. There is a difficulty to track them. There is a difficulty to shoot them down. It is a major challenge for any anti-ballistic missile system and missile defense. And I'm also positive that this issue should be addressed maybe next year here.
Thank you, Tal. I would just add that in the context of the Hague Code of Conduct, I remind you that the Hague Code of Conduct has an objective curb ballistic missile proliferation. And basically, for years already, there has been discussions, recurrent discussions about including, for example, cruise missile. And it's not been a success because it's basically it was seen basically as a complexification issue, as an issue that would make things more complicated. For sure, hypersonics has surfaced in the debates at some moment with experts. Yes, as Tal said, some parts of the flight might be helped by ballistic elements, but the flight might not be ballistic itself. So it's all this is under consideration. Again, adaptation will be key on this. I think Ambassador Nissen would agree with me that basically the approach that has been chosen, when I see the history of this regime, this tool, is to facilitate the approach and the discussions by limiting and I would say defining very clearly what is the scope of the discussions, and this has helped basically the discussions and engage countries. It has helped engaging discussions. And then what I see, and we're all aware of this, we have what we call in the HCOG community the 10 next year challenges, and you know it's already the 10 next year challenges, and this will be clearly part of one of these key challenges. But you know, this is also a characteristic of this instrument. You know, it's very pragmatic, in a sense, and all the community has to understand what it is about and how they can deal with this at the level of each participation. There was, oh yes, excuse me, please.
Thank you so much for the panelists for your very interesting introductions, and especially the thought-provoking introduction about the emerging trends and the emerging challenges and their blurring of the lines between the small satellite and the ballistic missiles. I've got a question to Ambassador Nielsen concerning HCOG, because for myself, I'm kind of interested. I want to know that because like the UN Register of Conventional Arms, there is like a standard form categorizing with different categories of different arms that you have to report to this registry. I'm wondering if HCOG has like a similar template or like a standardized reporting form that you can, like a reporting, you said that it's a transparency and every country, the participant will voluntarily submit their annual declaration, the number of the launches and the general kind of these ballistic missiles. So I'm just wondering if you have like a standardized forms, like a list which you can fill in so that it's easier for countries to for their reference. I'm wondering if you have that kind of mechanism in the HCOG. And also the second question is, because just now you gave us an overview of the authority of the HCOG, the subscribing countries. I'm wondering if you can give us an overview of the effectiveness of this HCOG, like in the past previous years, like how many countries have submitted their annual declaration. Just give us a general idea. Thank you so much.
Yes, there is a standard format to, and this to how you can, hand in your annual report that subscribing states use. And this is also a way to have, conformity to the extent possible, and also make things easy for subscribing states, and also when you're on the receiving end. When it comes to reporting, I think that has gone. I don't have the statistics over time, but I think it has maybe gone up and down. We have worked quite intensively over the past years to have, as much implementation as possible, and this is also part of our, reaching out on the implementation to have a high level of annual reports, so that it's being, so you show your transparency and your openness. But do you have the exact numbers?
No, I do not have it here as such. What I can say that, yes, what we see is a global trend towards a better compliance, I would say, with the, but it's true to say also that a number of countries and some numbers are coming from very, very far away before they. But the global trend is this one, and we analyze this as a positive influence of the collective thinking. And the more you have signatory countries, the more the countries who have signed are following the rules. Pre-notifications, for example, have become standard behavior, if not always the case. At least we have seen very, very good progress from a number of states, different states, who were not really always complying with this kind of moral obligations, who are clearly more and more compliant with this. Because, and this is something we keep saying, the efficiency of such a tool relies on the fact that the signatory countries will abide by the rule and play the game. And so this is a tendency. I can't tell you the figures, but this is something that's followed, I know, very much, especially by the Austrian Port of Contact on this. Sorry. Are there any other questions about these developments, or no? Okay. So maybe a last, I would say, turn of the table. I would ask you first about the relationship between these current issues as addressed by the HCOC, which is curbing the proliferation of ballistic missile technologies and creating more transparency, and the link with larger issues involving the use of space, etc. How do you see this? How do you see this connection? And then how do you assess the best approach we could have in the field of the space security issues? Maybe taking the HCOC as an example, linking it more narrowly, or keeping this in different spheres. How do you assess this? And I would go towards Isabel and Tal also for asking them about how they assess this evolution of space technologies, and what should be done maybe in advance to not prevent the advance of these space technologies, but to prevent misunderstandings. And so from your perspective as a chair, how would you position such a tool like the HCOC as an example to follow for space, maybe, or more as something that could serve as a platform? Or how do you see this?
Well, I think, what I want to say at the end, I think it's, we all, as I started off, I think we all in space-related matters, we all have an interest to develop our conversations further, to move towards, stronger cooperation, not less. We know, I think one needs to find a way of, and that's what I think we are doing in the HCOC. It's about being, both ambitious and realistic. and to try to, gather around something and then try to move forward. And be very, as I said, we are 140 states within the HCOC. Everyone has a voice. I think it's about encouraging everyone to feel that they are a part and take responsibility. That's how you develop it, internally. And if you manage to do this, to develop this as a relevant instrument, others want to join. And I think in that sense, you would move to a win-win, because it is easy to say that we want to have everything set, we want to have everything defined, we want to have everything structured, and we want everyone to be there. But in these times, it might not be so easy. And this is, another way to move with the same vision, and emphasizing, as you also pointed out, transparency, cooperation, that we somehow are in this together. So that would be my comment, and then it can be interpreted as yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador. So Isabel, yes, what would be your?
It's okay. Well, I will take a different point of view. I will say that the space systems are more and more critical. I mean, for, of course, civilian, but also military users. So, as also space is an interdependency medium, an interdependency place, I think that the global interest for security in space is in fact growing. On one side, you have the idea that there is different risk and threats on the space security, but in the same times, from operational point of view and way of life point of view, it's really necessary to keep the security in space, and I think it could be a good incentive to put the national states in order to keep this kind of stability. And my second point is that there is more and more capability today to rebuild the space system if there is any kind of problems on it, because we really need it. We cannot imagine to stop navigation, telecommunication, or even remote sensing systems. So if we consider that the countries are in situation to be able to rebuild their space capability in a short terms, I think it could also be a kind of deterrence to destroy satellites, because it's less efficient to destroy satellites if you are able to have a launcher available and the possibility to launch again. So I think this is a good part of the story. And of course, the bad part of the story is as activity is growing and becoming more and more strategic, you can have the temptation to try to stop it. But I will keep optimistic at the end, and I think that multilateral discussion and transparency are really the key for a good use of space, and I think that good use of space is, in fact, a natural trend and something that you cannot go into. But maybe as a researcher, I'm a bit optimistic, but I think it's important to say that too.
We are now on the year 2019, so it's pretty obvious to speak about the potential threats to assets in space with the era of mega constellations, and we can speak about hypersonic weapons and so on. But it's clear to me that we must identify the emerging technologies and the possibilities that they portray for future, let's say, 5 to 10 to 15 years from now. Just to give you one example, I can give you 10 examples, but you can think about satellite medium to large size in low Earth orbit, which the satellite itself could be used as a platform to launch other satellites, like nanosatellites, CubeSat, but not only CubeSat, and this could be, of course, a way of protection against weapons against the satellites, anti-satellite weapons. But again, we can now speak about changes in the inclinations in space, no notification, no warning of, you just suddenly realize that there are some new satellites in space because they are already launched unannounced in advance and so on. So I believe that the UNIDIR, HCOC, your research organization should address those types of issues and try to foresee in advance future technologies, and in that regard, they might be addressed at a diplomatic level before they are existing, because after there are ballistic missiles, you have a problem, and you want to prevent it. So this is my view on the issue.
Thank you very much. I think this is closing our session. I think they're on time. So please have a round of applause for our presenters for this very interesting session. I think we have now a break for a few minutes. We have now a break for a few minutes, or? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you for your participation.
I gave you a hint. The tremendous level of details agreed at the multilateral level. You know, you read the guidelines and you see it's unprecedented how deep in detail we move on those critical issues regarding space debris and everything. It's amazing. Oh, you know, as soon as we get a rubber stamp, we are free to move ahead, and you can pick up so much, and that will be important. But I believe we need this rubber stamp, we cannot just go on saying, oh, we are implementing it at our national level. I mean, the US and Canada. It's like rubbish. No, we need to be able to say, we have concluded this, and now we move forward, in my view. Because every time it comes up, I am scared, and everyone is deadly scared. Did I refer to the guidelines, or did I refer to the text of the guidelines and looking around? You see what I mean?
Don't fall into that trap.
Yeah, because it's so...
It's the agreed guidelines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I hope that you will be there for the 11th.
I will.
Yeah, good.
I will.
Excellent.
So it's not quite clear in what capacity,
No.
whether I will be there to the South African or whether I will be
Okay. Okay.
they're having some internal discussions in the delegation about this.
Okay.
We'll see.
So you might be a distinguished delegate again.
We'll see. But I think I was encouraged to get a message from Olga
Yeah.
asking me for the draft GA resolution very last year. So I will see.
Has Andrea contacted you on his efforts? Have you been involved in?
Andre,
I mean, you know that he's trying to.
yeah, and it worries me. It worries me how
Yeah.
all the other initiatives they're not dovetailing.
No. This is basically also a competition between Switzerland and Okay, we talk. No, I'm leaving at 8. Yeah, unfortunately. And then I have to go, tomorrow evening I have to go to Italy for another conference on Friday. And then on Monday I'm addressing in the HCOP thing. And then on Tuesday next week I'm invited by Joanne Gabrinovich to attend via Skype the American Bar Association panel on planetary protection. So I'll sit at home via Skype, with a glass of wine.
Have you had any indications from Have you had any indications from the Russian government?
No, and it's very no. I haven't heard anything, and it's a bit, strange. You see, they don't go there. Yeah, but I mean, he's just no taker, and I think they tried to. If I'm not mistaken, I think they tried to get to be involved in this process. In here, no, here, yeah. But also, because I talked to the guy from the permanent mission, the Russian guy, and he said that they're trying to get Vladimir, but they haven't heard from him since China. Whatever. And I don't know what will happen in June. No, I haven't heard anything from the Russians. And we know that everything in June will be DPRK issued an verbal on attending the session. So. Yeah. So we will have the U.S. delegation being vitalized.